Thanks, Clan. I think it's highly ironic that it's Fianna Fáil which is tabling the Dublin Transport motion before us. It was that party and its current Fine Gael partners in government who starved the Dublin region of transport and other key infrastructure over the past 5 decades. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, for example, the proposed light rail system included a north-side Ballymun-Dublin Airport line, but the Éireann government scrapped the north-side proposal and went ahead with the minimum red and green lines. Now, 3 decades later, Minister, we're still talking about Metro North, and Minister Donoghue has again put it on the long finger, 2026 or whenever. I want to commend Fine Gael Chief Executive Paul Reid and his staff for highlighting the issue and protecting the Metro North economic corridor up to Swords and Lisson-Hall. With the huge population growth in the North Fringe and Swords and the airport heading towards 30 million passengers per annum, Metro North must be fast-tracked. It's not whether it can be fast-tracked or not, it must be fast-tracked. It's also disappointing that a completion date for the Metro Light Rail couldn't have been targeted for, say, 2022, the anniversary of national independence, and in time for a possible Rugby Football World Cup. In fact, it could have been part of the package that Dick Spring and his committee were offering, in fact, to the other rugby federations. Instead, the National Transport Authority talks of yet more consultations. Yet in Spain and other EU partners, we've had many examples of metro and light rail systems being built in perhaps 3 to 5 years. At the Budgetary Oversight Committee yesterday, Cancorla, in our review of the capital programme, we again heard of the desperately low levels of investment in Ireland, this time from the Dublin Chamber of Commerce. The austerity governments since 2008 have allowed investment to fall below minimum depreciation levels, and Ireland has had the lowest gross fixed capital formation in the EU, at less than 2% in 2015. The current government's programme down to 2021 is a feeble attempt to remedy this, and the funding available needs to be doubled, especially in the areas of social housing and transport. I thoroughly agree with the Dublin Chamber that Metro North and Dart Underground projects should be prioritised in the next 5 years. The commuter train networks in the west of the Dublin city should also be urgently transformed into Darts. I believe the subsuming of the Railway Procurement Agency into the NTA in the last government was a grave mistake, and I was very disappointed to learn from NTA and from their RPA section recently that none of the above fixed rail projects are shovel-ready, despite the millions. There's a 60 million, Minister, that's been spent already on planning Metro North. Obviously, the Network Direct system introduced by Dublin Bus in the past decade has transformed the structure of bus transport in the city, and Dublin Bus staff must be complimented on the great efficiencies that they produced. But clearly, further massive investment is necessary in the bus network, especially to facilitate orbital travel around the city region. While a well-developed fixed-line rail system for Dublin is critical, the bus network will continue to be the workhorse of public transport. The number of people cycling to work at the end of 2016 is almost the same number as carried by the Lewis lines, and of course many more commuters use the Dublin Bike Scheme in addition. But I note that your department, Minister, you still haven't undertaken a formal review of the implementation of the National Cycle Policy Framework, and hopefully that you will carry this out later on in 2017. Colleagues and myself on Dublin City Council in the early 1990s, we promoted a citywide cycling network, but it's again taken decades to develop this and to expedite measures for pedestrian safety. I also proposed the Dutch-style home zones with 25 miles per hour then speed limits for residential areas in the mid-1990s. So while I welcome the completion of the Sutton to Sandy Grove cycleway in my own constituency of Dublin Bay North, I have received many complaints from constituents that the new James Larkin Road is dangerous on road safety grounds because it's so narrow and no lane has been provided for public transport and emergency vehicles. Constituents believe the original 2008 plan should have been constructed with a public transport lane and a safe cycleway beside it. Last year, I made a generally positive submission on the proposed College Green Plaza, but many workers have complained that this and other current plans for Dublin Quays emanating from the Traffic Department of Dublin City don't recognise the need for well-structured north-south arteries across Dublin for necessary motor traffic. While most of Dublin City, of course, is north of the Liffey, sometimes I think the current city manager, he forgets that something like 65 to 70% of his administrative area is actually north side. City planners, they've continued to approve large-scale office and other workplace developments in Dublin 2 and Dublin 4, and that approach approach requires, alongside increased facilities for pedestrians and cyclists and greatly enhanced public transport, the maintenance of a core network of cross-city street linkages. And indeed, the recent plans for the City Quays also fall into that category, because it would inevitably have deflected a lot of east-west traffic into the suburbs of Deputy O'Sullivan's constituency, which is unacceptable. And the final point I want to make, Lascan, just last week, Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Bristol, they elected, and other English cities, they elected their first mayors and received some reasonable autonomy from London. I believe the Dublin region more than ever needs an elected mayor to fight for necessary transport and other infrastructure for a capital city. In fact, I think the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael parties on Fingal County Council who prevented us from having a referendum on the mayoralty of Dublin. We do need a mayor. We need somebody to fight for Dublin, Manchester, London. We've seen the success of London mayor, Paris mayor, New York, and so on and so forth. We need a Dublin mayor as well to move forward on transport, and not to be relying on governments that are dominated by people who don't really care about Dublin. Thanks, Lascan.